What is up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, hockey fans of all ages? Thank you for joining us on the Thursday Night Hockey Show. It is Friday night. I am well aware of that. Tonight we are doing it. We're doing the show because I was indisposed last night. So today it's been a day. It's been a day and a half, maybe 2 days. Uh, the I had a colonoscopy today. Um, or yeah, today. I had the colonoscopy this morning. Yesterday, I was in prep mode, so no food. I could drink, but they made me drink this awful stuff called soup prep, and it turned me into a wind tunnel. Um, Not fun, but I will say, gentlemen, ladies, you get to a certain age, above 40 if you've got a family history, 50 if you don't. But get your preventative maintenance done. It's not just good for cars, it's good for your life. Get that stuff done. I've been very open about doing a colonoscopy. I make poop humor all the time. So I mean it's not like a new thing for me, but I did it to raise awareness and yeah, it sucks. One day of not eating and then taking this awful stuff that fuses you to a bathroom for a couple hours twice. I had to do two doses of this stuff. It sucks. Not gonna lie. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. But you know what sucks worse? Getting colon cancer, getting prostate cancer if you're afraid to get a doctor's finger up your butt. Uh, that is momentary discomfort for something that can prevent absolute discomfort in your life or ending your life, 100%. So get yourself checked. Do that because that is the best way to prevent long-term health issues. Um, and again, it's the whole Ben Franklin thing: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Get it done. It's not bad. It's a temporary inconvenience, a temporary pain, but then once it's done, you're done. I don't have to do it for another 3 years, even though I've got a significant family history. That's why I've been doing it. This is my 3rd one. I don't have to do it for 3 years. So, 3 years from now, I'll go ahead and get it scheduled and get it taken care of because it's that important. It absolutely is. So, anyway, thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to those on this screen is on TikTok. On this screen is on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch. Not on LinkedIn. I don't like my LinkedIn folks doing that stuff. Yes, we can fly a kite on this string with it and attached during a storm. Absolutely, do that. That's a lot of fun. Um, you might invent something. Just say that. All right, let's talk about the week in hockey. We are at the most wonderful time of the year, especially if you're a fan of either one of these teams. It's the Stanley Cup Finals. Really good hockey that's been played over the course of the Stanley Cup playoffs. There's been some stinker games. There's been some stinker series, including the series that. Well, I hesitate to call it a stinker series because that Carolina Florida series, all the games were close. Um, Overtime in 3 of the games, 4 overtimes in 1 of the games. I mean, it was a really good series. It just sucked that it was only 4 games. Um, and we'll get into that in a little bit. We're going to go through some of the news of the week in hockey. But let's talk about the schedule for the Stanley Cup playoffs. They start tomorrow, or Stanley Cup Finals. They start tomorrow, June 3rd at 8 p.m. Then we go Monday at 8 p.m. as well. Those are both in Vegas, so it's a 5 o'clock start locally. Then we move the series shifts to Florida. They get an extra 2 days off, or an extra day off. I'm sorry. It goes to Thursday, June 8th at 8 p.m. And the earliest that the cup can be won is Game 4, Saturday, June 10th. So there's at least 2 more episodes of the Thursday Night Hockey Show heading into the off season, and so Saturday, June 10th. Then Game 5, if necessary, is June 13th. Game 6 is at Florida. That is June. I'm sorry. Game 5 is June 13th in Vegas. Game 6 is June 16th at Florida, and then Game 7 will be a Monday night game, June 19th, 8 p.m. Eastern time. So 2 to 3 more episodes of the Thursday Night Hockey Show left in the season. The last episode after the Stanley Cup Finals, we'll talk about my predictions. I can tell you I didn't get the prediction right because I had the Rangers winning the Stanley Cup this year. And we'll talk about my predictions on how teams would finish and who made the playoffs and all that stuff. Um, I, I don't know that I was too horrible. I think I undersold Seattle and maybe oversold Florida going into the playoffs. Now that Florida's in the finals, it looks like a genius. Anyone picking Florida it looks like a genius move. Nobody anticipated Florida's struggles going out of the gate with the new look lineup, new coach, and all that stuff. But they really hit their stride. Um, but let's talk about the news in the week of hockey. Um, the Toronto Maple Leafs have they were we didn't go over this last week, but they relieved their general manager Kyle Dubas uh, from his duties as GM, or didn't renew him, or fired him. Who knows? I mean, it was kind of a gray area because Dubas's contract was up for extension, and they did not extend him. Um, uh, the other day, they announced that Brad Treliving is going to be the new GM of the team. It's going to take over in some interesting times. Um, but uh, there are two things that he really needs to address coming out of the gate. One, who's going to be the coach? Is it going to remain Sheldon Keefe, maybe for a season? Get the feeling of how Sheldon manages the room for Brad, whether he thinks that's a good fit or not, or is he going to go another way immediately? The other thing is Austin Matthews. Austin Matthews is going into the final year of his first big contract. We'll be getting a big contract sometime in the next year and a month, and whether that's going to be from Toronto or another team, it remains to be seen. But there's going to be some movement on that, and we'll get into that in a minute. But guys, I want to talk a little bit more in depth about what's going on in Toronto. We did get two coaches hired. Spencer Carberry, who was the Leafs power play coach, he moves to the Washington Capitals. He had been with the Washington Capitals under Peter Laviolette, and he is now returning to the Washington Capitals as the head coach. So there's some familiarity there. There's lots of questions in Washington. How competitive can the team be? They're older. They don't have the star power that they once did. I mean, they still have Ovi, still have Backstrom, but they're both older players. They don't years of mortgaging the future for playoff success. Well, not as bad as some teams, but Washington's kind of in that boat. So, who's coming down the line? They're going to get, I think, the eighth overall pick in the draft. So, they get a chance to pick up a pretty good player coming out of the draft. But it's going to be a couple seasons before they can move on over. Andrew Brunette was named the head coach of the Nashville Predators. Um, uh, Good hiring by the Nashville Predators. Brunette did a admirable job in the wake of Joel Quenneville getting fired uh, for blowing the whole Kyle Beach situation in Chicago for his inaction for his cover up. Quenneville is still under suspension by the league. Can't be hired as a coach until he's released from that. Although there may be some movement on that. That Quenneville may be allowed to resume coaching next season. Um, but there's confusion as to how that would work. Can a team hire them and ask the NHL to waive his suspension, or does he get his suspension waived and then he can get hired by a team? But we'll see where that goes. But Andrew Burnett stepped in to the Florida Panthers, led them to a yes, the Panthers were 8-0 at the time when Burnett took over, but he did lead them to a President's Trophy that season, won their first playoff series in a long time. Did lose to the Tampa Bay Lightning in the conference semis, and was not renewed. Paul Maurice was brought in. Of course, we know the rest of this history with Paul Maurice and the Florida Panthers playing in the Stanley Cup Finals. But I think that earned him. He spent this last year as assistant coach in New Jersey. Of course, New Jersey, just went leaps and bounds above what they had done the previous season, and so that earns him another opportunity to be a head coach. with the Nashville Predators. Nashville has some questions. I mean, they did play really well after they had the trade deadline moves. Getting rid of Ekholm and Tanner Jeannot. Now, you know, what are they going to be able to build in Nashville? Andrew Burnett's going to be able to change this team from kind of a. What he's going to do is change this team from a really defense first team to, kind of fire wagon hockey, which is what happened with Florida. What happened with the New Jersey Devils. I think this is going to be a much more offensive and fun team to watch. Nashville games have been kind of snoozers. I mean, they've been a decent team, but they've been kind of snoozers over the last few years, ever since the Cup Finals, really. And uh, but I think Andrew Brunette will improve their fortunes. Just depends on how that's going to translate into playoffs. If he can get the team back in the playoffs this season, they did make an admirable run towards the end of the season. They just didn't have enough runway for as far back as they were. So, um, but yeah, talking about we talked about GMs. Brad Treliving is now the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and there's a lot of things that Treliving is going to have to do because it's going to be hard. He's in the worst media market in the NHL. As far as uh, people hating on the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's kind of national sport in Canada, especially in Ontario. Um, Kyle Dubas faced it. He noted that when he had his press conference at the end of the season, of the toll it takes on him and his family. Um, and Treliving is now in it. He was the GM of the Calgary Flames for several seasons. Did some decent trades for the Calgary Flames. Um, Calgary is kind of one of those tweener teams that makes the playoffs sometimes, doesn't make the playoffs sometimes. Led to his ouster, and yeah, so now he is the GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Like I mentioned, his two big concerns coming out of coming into being the GM is one, make that decision on Sheldon Keefe. Do you move on immediately, or do you hold off and get a idea of what you're working with Sheldon Keefe? The second one is Austin Matthews. Austin Matthews has a no movement clause that kicks in at the end of this contract season. So he's in his current contract season is the 22-23 contract that ends on July 1st. So sometime this month, there's a good chance that Austin Matthews could get moved. Um, for Treliving, he's got three guys that are making almost north of 11 million. Austin Matthews makes 11.6 million per season. Um, uh, uh, Johnny Tavares makes 11 million, and then Mitch Marner is just below at 10.9 million per season. So they've got almost 40% of their salary cap committed to three players. Something has got to move because um, you know, it's either Marner or Matthews because again, you can't have almost 40% of your salary cap when the salary cap isn't going up a ton this year. Um, you can't have 40% of your salary cap committed to just three players. Um, you've seen the issues that they've had over the last few seasons. They mortgaged a lot of their future, um, bringing in salary, bringing in or well, not bringing in salary, bringing in players and giving up draft picks. It's tough. Um, this season they do have a first round draft pick, but it's Boston's that they got in the Eric Gustafson trade that sent Orlov and Garnet Hathaway to Boston and some picks to the Washington Capitals. um, then let's see. They don't have a second round pick in the next 3 drafts, which that's as far out as you can go is 3 drafts that you have picks that you can trade off. They've traded off all 3 second round picks. They don't have a first round pick in the 2025 draft. Um, and they pick that 28th pick, and I think it's a while before they pick again in the draft. I think it's the 5th round is the next pick that they have. Um, Yeah, the and looking at their recent draft picks, there's not much in the cupboard other than Matthew Nyes, which we saw during during the first round or the playoffs this season. Serviceable young player. He's a little small at this point. I mean, he got knocked around pretty good in the playoffs. Injured. Hopefully, he's okay. But he was a second round pick last 2 years ago, came out of college and is now playing for the Leafs. Will he play for the Leafs next season? Um, if they trade Marner or Matthews, yeah, but I could foresee him being put in the minors next season to season up a little bit, gain a little weight, and not be the target of big brooding defenseman. So, but yeah, Austin Matthews, 1 year left, and at the start of the year, his no movement clause kicks in. Same thing with Mitch Marner. Mitch Marner has 2 more years left after this one. You might be able to get more value for Mitch Marner because he does have that extra year. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I think overall Matthews is the better player. Marner is the guy that he's the straw that can stir the drink as far as getting you assists. He's kind of the Adam Oates of this team, whereas uh, Austin Matthews is kind of the Brett Hull of this team. Um, one guy's going to set up the other. They're going to make a boatload of points. Um, if I was Buffalo, I would go after Marner. Um, I would mortgage a little bit of the future, some future draft picks to the Toronto Maple Leafs for Mitch Marner because if you can get a guy that can set up guys like Tage Thompson and Alex Tuck consistently, like Marner does, that's golden. That'll a team that finished in the top five of scoring in the NHL this year will probably finish first because of that kind of play. So. But I think it's going to take a lot to move Marner. I think it's going to take a lot to move Matthews. I think if a team does make that move, it's going to be Arizona. They do have the draft capital to make those kinds of moves and some young players that they could move. Um, Plus, they're trying to salvage their franchise in the desert, and I wouldn't be surprised if they make that move. But we'll see. Um, as for uh, talking about Kyle Dubas, who was let go by the Toronto Maple Leafs, he lands on his feet very quickly. No surprise, he goes to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Um, that's been rumored even during the season that if he doesn't renew with Toronto, he would go to the Penguins, and they made that happen, especially after firing Brian Burke and Ron Hextall, the brain trust, and I use that in very light terms. That had led the Pittsburgh Penguins, and we'll talk about the troubles that Kyle Dubas faces. Um, so, uh, Pittsburgh Penguins have $20 million in cap space. That's a lot of money, this year that they can deal with, they can send out. Um, they've got 15 players under contract for next season, so they need to fill 8 NHL roster slots. Um, Problem is they're gonna have to pay for it. They don't have they don't have the draft picks this season. They won't have the draft pick. They don't have the draft picks that have been picked before to fill the cupboard right now. Between 2014, they picked Kasperi Kapanen in the first round, 2014 and and this last draft. They've had 2 first round picks. The brain trust, again, I use that in very soft terms. Brain trust that has been running the Pittsburgh Penguins has squandered a lot of draft capital in exchange for bringing in players that get them to a first round exit. Yeah, they make the playoffs. They didn't make the playoffs this year, um, but they make the playoffs, but they don't really make a whole lot of noise ever since they've won the back to back Stanley Cups. Um, so they've been chasing the cups, but they haven't had the horses to do it. Um, Now you've got 3 guys, Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby, and Chris Letang, um, all on varying degrees. I mean, Crosby's got 2 more years left in his contract. Malkin's got 3. Now Letang's got like 5 years left on his contract. An absolute head scratching contract last year. Um, Letang's had stroke issues twice in his NHL career now. Crosby spent some time on the shelf the last couple of years. I've got Evgeny Malkin, while a physical force when he's on the ice, has also spent a lot of time on the shelf in the last few years. There really just is not enough offensive depth on this team. The guys that they have are just not great. Um, they brought in Raquel's decent. Um, Jeff Carter has played his best hockey already. Really struggled down the stretch. Was on the ice for a lot of goals last year. Um, yeah, there's a lot to build within the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they don't have the draft picks in their pipeline right now, nor do they have the draft picks coming that they can make those picks. Um, yeah, so they have two first round picks, only two first round picks since 2014. Um, and of the picks they've made over the last since 2014, Casper and Kapanen's played the most games. Um, But most of the players that have made the NHL are, and it's not a lot, it's only like 4 or 5. Radim Zohorna is fairly decent, um, but more of a physical force than anything. Um, yeah, Philip Gustafson is now in Minnesota. The Cam Addison is the a defenseman that's in the Minnesota system as well. And Daniel Sprong. And I think Sprong is everywhere. Like he's played like most teams at this point. Like Washington, Anaheim. I think he's in Seattle. It's hard to follow where Daniel Sprong ends up from year to year, but yeah, that's where Daniel Sprong is at, and not a whole lot of drafting success, and if you're giving up all those draft picks, you kinda need to have a really good drafting team because you need to hit on some of those 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounders that, even 6th or 7th rounders, to be able to supplement your roster. They've done a decent job in supplementing from the college ranks, getting college free agents to come in and playing decent. Jake Gensel's a great example of that, but, um I've got a feeling that Pittsburgh is going to be in for a rebuild, and it seems like every time that Pittsburgh goes through a rebuild, it's very long, very painful, and there's a chance that they end up moving. So they'll need another savior to come in and save the franchise, like Lemieux and Crosby. But yeah, uh, it's a very interesting, move. I think Dubas can do kind of his little money puck thing with, bringing in low dollar forwards, to supplement the roster. I just don't know that it's gonna be enough in a very competitive Eastern Conference. Um, the teams that finished below, there's 3 teams I think that finished below the Pittsburgh Penguins that I think can reverse the fortunes next season. Buffalo, Ottawa, and Detroit. There's some questions with the Ottawa Senators, especially around goaltending, but there is a chance that all 3 of those teams could pass Pittsburgh going on. Now, here's one thing to ponder, and I've said this ever since both Washington and Pittsburgh have missed the playoffs because you got arguably yes, the older, versions, but 2 of your biggest players that are not gonna be in the playoffs. I do foresee in the next few seasons that we see an expansion of the playoffs to an NBA style play-in series. Um, so what you'll have are the 2 wildcard teams hosting the ninth and 10th place teams in a series. So, 8 versus 10 and 9 versus wait a minute. I'm sorry, 7 versus 10 and 8 versus 9, um, in each conference. It expands the playoffs, gives, teams a little bit of hope that are kind of on that cusp, over the last few years, and, And the reason why is it just makes sense from both a financial perspective. Teams will buy into it because they get there's a chance at another home playoff game, and keeps the fans engaged as far as the playoffs go, and the players will dig it because there's more games to play and another chance at getting into the playoffs. I think it's a win-win for all involved. I know the purists will hate that idea. I understand half the teams make the playoffs, but it's going to end up being like the NBA. They're gonna add those 2 extra teams because it's another thing to talk about, another thing to get hyped about. Um, the possibility maybe of reducing the season by a couple of games or what, I'm not really sure. Um, it'll be interesting to see what the effect is on the schedule if they do decide to do that. Plus, we talked last week about expansion, the idea of expansion. Do we, we can relocate the Coyotes, but then there's still cities that are knocking on the door to get NHL franchises. Um, I don't. I would not be surprised to see us expand to 36, 36 teams. So you have again even conferences, even divisions. Um, but yeah, does that affect the how many games we play a season, who we play against, and all that stuff? So, very interesting future coming up for the NHL over the summer. Some decisions will have to be made, especially with the Toronto situation, but and Pittsburgh. Um, we got a few more coaches open. I did talk about Joel Quinville. There's rumors that he may come back to coach the Rangers. He may come back to, if they decide to move on from Sheldon Keefe. Do the Toronto Maple Leafs come calling? It'll be an interesting thing to see where Joel Quinville ends up. I do think he does get the chance to coach again. I'm not overly happy about that. But if Chicago can benefit off of off of the draft lottery, there is no hockey karma or hockey gods. It's just um, it just sucks. So I feel bad for Kyle Beach. It seems like nobody. Yeah, Joel Quinville lost a year off of his career, but no real punishment here. Chicago made more in season ticket sales off of the Connor Bedard than they had to pay in a fine for what they did to Kyle Beach. Just absolutely awful all the way around. Um, but that's just the way it goes. Um, all right, so let's talk about the finals. Before we get too deep into the finals, I want to talk about because we didn't get a chance to talk about the end of the series last week. It was Game 4 that night, and um, the Vegas Golden Knights did end up winning that series. It was 3 games to none at that point. Dallas did battle back to take 2 games, games 4 and 5, got it back to Dallas, and then they just laid an absolute stinker in Game 6. Nobody looked good on the Dallas Stars. Um, you know, uh, Jamie Benn's suspension didn't hurt the Dallas Stars, but Jamie Benn's presence on the ice, I think, did. So, um, but Dallas had just a host of strategic errors. They couldn't handle the forecheck, couldn't get the puck out of their zone cleanly. They also did not take enough shots on um, Aiden Hill. Aiden Hill is not a rookie goaltender, but this is his first time in the playoffs. Relatively untested. He was kind of the third goalie going into the season for the Vegas Golden Knights, of course, with Robin Leonard being injured all season. He was in the backup role. Or actually, no, he was still third at that point. It was Thompson and Laurent Brossoit. Thompson gets injured towards the end of the season. Brossoit comes in. Brossoit gets injured in the first round. Now it is Aiden Hill, his fourth string goaltender. Um, and Dallas did not test him enough. Um, where they did control the play, they did get some goals in game 4 and 5, they did generate some offense. I still think Vegas looked like the better team throughout the entire series. Um, but, yeah, they just didn't get, they didn't get in the zone, they didn't possess the puck, cleanly, and then they, just any chance that, Vegas had, every bounce almost went, Vegas's way. The problem also was that for Dallas in the entire playoffs didn't get a consistent effort out of Jake Ottinger. Ottinger was a phenomenal goaltender the last couple seasons, and he almost single-handedly won that Calgary series, even though there was no scoring on behalf of the Dallas Stars in that entire series. Um, he almost won that series. The game 7 was, just a phenomenal effort. I thought, "Man, they get this guy some offensive help. Yeah, this sky's the limit for this team because, he's the guy that could carry the team." This playoff proved the otherwise. Um, he only got, consistent effort in the end of the Minnesota series where they won the last 2 games on the trot and, closed out that series, or 3 games, on the trot and closed out that series. He was, inconsistent against Seattle, and he was woefully inconsistent against the Vegas Golden Knights. Lots of, questionable goals, and, goaltending is a fickle business. You can be top of the world one season, and then you just, uh, lose it for some reason. I think back to, Jim Carrey, the former Boston goaltender who, um had that magical Vezina season, like 98, 99, um, and within, like, 5 years was out of the league. Got traded to Atlanta and just bounced around and could never find his game again. Um, does that happen to, Jake Ottinger? How does he build off of this season? Because that's the key. You can have a bad playoffs as long as you correct your game and come back better. Some goalies can't do that, and we'll see next season. If you're playing fantasy, I would hold off on drafting Jake Ottinger, um, just because this season could play into his mind for next season. So, anyway, let's talk specifically about the finals. Um, Here are the keys to the series that I think will determine who wins the series. First off, will Florida have their edge due to having 9 days off between the Wednesday that they end the series and Saturday that they're starting this finals? It's a long layoff, and generally, when there's a long layoff, the team that has the shorter layoff uh, will have an advantage. I think it's 1 in 6 or something like that when a team has more than 9 days off between series. Um, so that can they get their game going? Um, I think that first period is going to be very telling. Can they get their legs under them? Can they hold Vegas off the scoreboard that first period, and then get their legs under them? Because I think by the second period that they'll be into the series. They'll be ready to go. Um, it's just, can you keep the game close enough until the first intermission? Um, uh, it's going to be difficult. I think the best thing that happened to Vegas was losing those 2 games. Um, because it stretched their series out. They still got a significant amount of rest. They won it on Tuesday, and they're playing Saturday. So that's a decent amount of rest between the start of their series, and so you know I think Vegas is going to have that early advantage in the series. Plus, it's going to be in Vegas. The whole floor show and all that stuff. It's Florida's first time in the Stanley Cup Finals since 1996, since the uh, first administration of Bill Clinton, and I can't even remember who the prime minister was back then. Maybe it was Chrétien, but anyway, uh, yeah, it's been a long time for Florida, and we'll see what kind of juice they have. I think they're going to be very nervous. Vegas is going to be nervous. I mean, yeah, it's been 5 years since they've or 6 years since they got to the Stanley Cup Finals against the Capitals. Not much is they've got some significant players that are still around, March or so, and Stone and players like that were part of that first playoff run, but um, Will Carrier, guys like that. Um, but I think Florida is gonna be at the disadvantage here, so having the extra layoff, having that, having the home ice advantage there for Vegas, uh, Florida's gonna have to be amped up and ready to go immediately, and I think just that layoff is gonna, put them in a strategic disadvantage. Um can Florida make Aiden Hill work? Like I said, with Dallas, Dallas didn't make Aiden Hill work. The points that they did, they are actually able to score goals. They're getting shots on Aiden Hill are going to be key. I think or I'm sorry, Florida has the horses that can get those shots on net. I think they have the forecheck that can develop the turnovers that get those high quality scoring chances. But that's gonna be a key. Can Florida make Aiden Hill work? Can they get shots on goal? Get those shots on net because that's the key to, beating the Vegas Golden Knights. Spending more time in your zone than theirs. Yes, it's very cliche, very basic, but well, that's really all that it is. Um, on a personal note, can Sabres fans watch this series? It is Jack Eichel versus Sam Reinhart, but not even just that. It's Jack Eichel with Will Carrier, Braden McNabb, all former Sabres. Reinhart with uh, Brandon Montour, who I hated when they traded, but I mean, I understand that he was going to sign with the Sabres in the offseason, so they got some value for it, not a whole lot. Um, Probably the worst, I think the worst value for value trade that Kevin Adams has made. Um, Not only that, but Zach Dalpe, who's contributed some. He's kind of a bench player for the Florida Panthers, and then Eric Stahl. Um, Two of the Stahl brothers made it out of the Eastern Conference Finals. Eric Stahl and Mark Stahl, and Eric Stahl had a cup of coffee for the Sabres. That 20 to 21 season, um, uh, weighing very heavily on this series because you had Jack Eichel, who was injured during that season. It was that COVID shortened season from January to July that, Jack Eichel got injured during that season. They had the 18-game losing streak. But you had Sam Reinhart's been a massive contributor to the Florida Panthers. You've had Jack Eichel on that team. You had Brandon Montour on that team, who single-handedly kind of ended that 18-game losing streak. I mean, he kind of put the team on his back for a couple days, a couple games towards the end of that streak, and ended it. Um, and then Eric Stahl, who really didn't do a whole lot. I think he only had like one goal before he got traded to Montreal at the deadline. So yeah, that whole season, all peppered into this Stanley Cup Finals. I've made my peace. My hope is that Florida wins this series because I really just don't want to see Jack Eichel lift that cup over his head because he's a punk. But that's my feelings. Another key is which Bob will we get? Are we going to get the Bob that's been stealing series that has kept a high-powered offense like Toronto to a couple goals a game and getting them out in 5 games? Do we get the Bob that beat the vaunted Boston Bruins coming into late into that series and really just stealing the series for the Florida Panthers? Or do we get the Bob that was replaced at the end of the season and it has been benched in the last 2 playoffs? Um, f For Florida to have any hope, he's gotta be the good Bob. Because if he's bad, this is going to be a very, very short series. Um, but I think he's gonna be, decent in the series. The only thing that's gonna, like I said, with the layoff, does that cool him down? Um, that's the concern. Which team? This is a great series because we've got 2 teams that are really awesome at the forecheck. Vegas gave Dallas all sorts of problems. Uh, Florida has made quick work of the playoffs by uh, having just a phenomenal forecheck. Um, which team gets their forecheck going first, and who will be the most consistent at it? Key is consistency. If let's say Vegas goes off in that first period and gets their forecheck going, but then pulls back a little bit. Um, you know, I will hesitate to say that Florida will have the advantage. Florida has been consistent with their forecheck all season. They are a tough team to play, even when Buffalo beat them. The times that they played this season, um, they're just a tough out, and I I almost give Florida the advantage on this for this playoff round. I'm not selling Vegas short on their forecheck. Their forecheck's awesome, but I think this is going to be the key for the Florida Panthers. If you can get their forecheck going, um, and you're not hemmed into your zone, you're hemming them into their zone. You're going to win this series. As far as predictions go for this year or for this series, my heart wants Florida to win this. As I said, I think they're fully capable of doing it. It really is who gets the early jump and who can be consistent in this series. Um, but my mind says Vegas, but it will be a battle all the way to the end. I think Vegas in 7 in this series. Said that when in my TikTok video and YouTube video after Vegas won their series. Um, it's just the compendium of things. Things have to go really right for the Florida Panthers, and they have for this playoffs. They have to continue going right for the Florida Panthers for them to win this series. Vegas has a little bit more margin for error, but I think it's going to be a tremendous series. I think it's going to go all the way, and we'll be talking about games 1 through 3 as we get into next week's show. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it, and we will talk to everyone next week on when we return to the Thursday night hockey show. For games 1 through 3. Have a good one, everybody.